In this video, we're going to take a look at ancient Greek architecture. You may not know it, but every day you probably see elements of ancient Greek architecture all around you. In Newcastle, for example, it pops up everywhere, at the Quayside, on Grey Street in the centre of town, and here on Westgate Road, not too far from the train station. The grandest and most obvious inspiration for these architectural elements is found in ancient Greek temples. Across the city-states, in areas both urban and rural, the Greeks were heavily involved in a culture of temple building. In towns and cities, they were a central feature of life. They were literally houses for the gods, and from where the gods could view life happening outside. Because they were so central, in more remote areas, temples were used to stake claim to land, colonists, for example, defining their borders. Today, people compete to build the highest, tallest building in the world. In ancient Greece, people competed to build the most elaborate and impressive temple. And so, truly great temples, such as the Parthenon in Athens, when newly built, not only represented devotion to the god within, but also the power and wealth of the city-state.
The key thing to realise about a Greek temple is that it didn't function like a church or a religious building of that nature. Essentially, a Greek temple was actually the house for a god or goddess, and within the temple you would find a cult statue to the deity whose temple it was. In this case, we have the goddess Athena inside the temple, recognisable by her armour, her helmet and shield, and holding a spear. The interior of a Greek temple is often divided up into three parts. You'd have a front porch called a pronaos. You'd have the main body of the temple where the cult statue would stand, and that was often called the naos, although it's sometimes referred to as a keller. And at the back of the temple you might have a rear porch called the episthodomos. And with this temple, the naos has large doors which could be opened for special events, and the cult statue of the god or goddess could look out through the large doors to any activity happening in front of the temple, and often activities such as sacrifice would take place in front of the temple, and they would be the main religious acts associated with a Greek temple. The exterior of a Greek temple would have been surrounded by a colonnade or peristyle. This particular example of a Greek temple is built in the Doric style, and the columns of a Doric temple were quite sturdy and very plain. And Greek Doric architecture is distinguished by the fact that the columns do not have a column base but rise straight from the base of the building. In addition, this temple has a Doric frieze, which is distinguished by elements known as triglyphs and metopes. The triglyphs are architectural elements that are divided into three parts. The metopes on this particular example are plain, but in a lot of examples would have had architectural sculpture. The frieze runs all the way around the temple and is a theme that you can see on lots of Greek architecture. If you look above the frieze, we have a pediment, a triangular area, and a lot of pediments on ancient Greek buildings would have carried architectural sculpture, often representing myths relating to the god or goddess who the temple was dedicated to. Temples were generally very lavish buildings. A lot of time and effort was expended on their construction, and often the materials used would be of the highest quality possible. The Parthenon in Athens, for example, was completely built out of marble. This particular example, though, has terracotta roof tiles, and we know that some Greek temples would have been built out of limestone and decorated with stucco plaster, and the architectural sculpture might have been made out of marble.
Ancient Greek pillars come in 3 styles. The first is Doric, as seen on the temple model. This is very straightforward and simple, with no base and a circular capital at the top. The second style is Ionic. These have a fairly large base, flutes running up the pillar, and a capital that looks a little bit like a scroll being unfurled. The third style is Corinthian. This is the most flowery and ornate version of an ancient Greek pillar. You can always spot them by the elaborate leaves and scroll work at the top of the capital. It is also important to remember that ancient Greek temples were polychromic. This means multicoloured. They were painted with bright pigments intended to catch your eye and show off the intricacy of the temple. Every element was carefully constructed to leave the viewer with an impression of power and wealth. So effective was this architecture that throughout the history of the Western world, those who want to impress others have built in the Greek style. From the ancient Romans in the Forum to the aristocrats of 18th century England building in the neoclassical style. From the Bank of England to even museums such as the British Museum. Wherever people wanted to build an impressive building, the architecture of ancient Greece has been replicated, copied, and modified throughout the ages. Indeed, even the symbol for museums on road signs references ancient Greek architecture. And so, as industry and wealth saw cities like Newcastle growing in the north of England, naturally they turned to classical ancient Greek architecture to express their confidence and tell the world about their status. Unfortunately, no writings by ancient Greek architects survive, so we don't know their philosophy, their mindset, when designing and building these impressive structures. But one thing we do know is how these buildings made people feel. They were truly in awe. These buildings were, and still are, awesome. And throughout time, and across the world, no culture has ever really outdone the impact of an ancient Greek temple and the features of ancient Greek architecture. So even if we don't fully understand the precise reason for every element of ancient Greek architecture, we certainly understand its purpose. We can still feel that purpose today. It's there to impress you. So, now that you've heard a little about ancient Greek architecture, why not go out and try to spot these elements in the world around you? I guarantee, the more you look, the more you'll see.